Things got tense fast in this exchange, and it reveals more than just a disagreement. Before we get into it, hit subscribe and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what you think about this. On the arena with Kasie Hunt, a sharp clash unfolded between S.E. Cupp and Scott Jennings over Donald Trump's escalating conflict with Iran, and the exchange exposed just how shaky the justification for this war really is. Cupp cuts straight to the core. Despite all the aggression, nothing has actually improved. Iran's regime is still intact, nuclear materials remain, and the Strait of Hormuz, previously open, is now closed, triggering real economic consequences. She makes it clear that not only are we in a worse strategic position, but Americans are feeling it directly through rising gas prices and financial strain. Jennings, meanwhile, leans on hypothetical outcomes and wait-and-see logic, arguing the war could still be justified if it eventually prevents Iran from obtaining nuclear weapons. But even he can't deny the political reality staring him in the face. Polling shows a majority of Americans believe this military action was a mistake, and Trump has failed to bring the public along. What this segment really highlights is a growing disconnect, a White House pushing a war it hasn't convincingly explained, and a public increasingly unconvinced that any of this is making America safer.
Iran doesn't want to move quickly. This is good for Iran. Iran is loving this. And they've been preparing for a war of attrition with us for 20 years. The enemy gets a say.
I don't think the Ayatollah would agree that this has been good for him. I mean,
I didn't say for the Ayatollah.
I mean, but the top layer of the regime would not agree that it's been good for them.
We've opened up. I'm just looking back at what we've gotten out of this so far, or what anyone's gotten out of this so far. The regime is unchanged. The Iranian people are not liberated. The nuclear materials still there. Strait of Hormuz still closed.
And it wasn't closed before, to be clear, before this started.
No, I mean now.
Yeah.
Closed.
Right. No, you're right. I mean, what have we gotten out of it? We have gotten a closed Strait of Hormuz.
We're in a worse spot. And obviously we're seeing the result of this economic pain and people very frustrated with, being misled, lied to during a campaign in which we were told Biden and Kamala were going to get us into a war with Iran and Trump wasn't. And people who just dealing with the economic frustration. I think at the very least, because suddenly everyone's a foreign policy expert, right? And some are going to say, we're winning this war, and Trump is saying it's terminated. There's no unilateral termination. Iran gets a say. But putting all of that aside, at the very least, I think it's very clear Trump, Hegseth have failed to sell this war to the American people. And that's what we're seeing in those poll numbers. And that's a big deal in an election year.
Yeah, well, let's dig into some of this polling for this side of the table, because as he astutely points out, I think it helps explain the disparities here. Okay, so the right decision, wrong decision in the Washington Post poll, 61% say that it was a mistake to take military action against Iran. 36% say that it was the right decision. Now, what does this split look a lot like? I don't think I have it to hand, but let me just tell you, it looks a lot like President Trump's approval rating, okay? His up or down. Now, compare, this is Iran, Iraq, and Vietnam, okay? Obviously, in Iraq, the Bush administration did a ton of work, much, of course, later discredited, but at the time, they did a lot of work to convince the American public that there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, that getting rid of Saddam Hussein was a good idea. And they built up public opinion. They sent Colin Powell to the United Nations to work on that. Now, Vietnam, I'm going to date myself, but you all know that I was not around for the Vietnam War. My knowledge of how that was sold to the American public was quite different, but that also came in the context of a very long fight against communism in the wake of, 2 world wars, the Korean War, and other places. But it's just worth noting that the polling that you are looking at in Iraq, okay, 2007, when these numbers look like what the Iran numbers look like now, 2007 was 4 years after we invaded. In Vietnam, 1970, well into the conflict. Scott Jennings, I mean, how big of a mistake was it for the president to do this without bringing the American public along with him?
Well, look, I noted in the other survey you put up that 41% said it was too soon to tell. And I suspect what they are waiting for is whether we meet the primary objective, which I do think the president's been pretty clear about. We can't let them have a nuclear weapon. And so if we exit this thing, whenever we exit this thing, and can tell the American people, yes, this stuff was buried under the rubble, we've got a plan to extract it, or it's not going anywhere, or however we explain that they're not going to be able to build a nuclear weapon, I suspect a good chunk of the people who say too soon to tell will say, okay, well, we exited having met our objective. Now, the question is, how long is that going to take? And the truth is we don't know the answer to that. I think the president would like it to happen right now. He obviously would love to make a deal right now. And I also think the president believes that the blockade, in which we're not actually dropping any bombs on them, we're just in the middle of a blockade right now, is actually more effective at hastening the end of this than the military campaign was. I hope that's true. I interviewed a former Rear Admiral this week, and he was like, yeah, a little patience on the blockade, and you may just get what you want, which is ultimately bringing the Iranian economy to its knees, bringing them to the table, getting China to force them to end this. And the way it can only end for him is they don't have or cannot build a nuclear weapon.
Yeah, I mean, listen, you and others who have sat in the Republican seat on this show have made an excellent case for why it's important that Iran not have a nuclear weapon. It's that the president didn't do that in advance, right? Jamal, I mean, I want to bring this up because I think it's important to underscore, right? We talk about gas prices, right? You all drive by your local gas station, you know what it costs. But it's not just about the numbers. I mean, we do averages here. That's kind of the easy thing to pull. But the Washington Post asked Americans, how is this impacting you? What are you doing differently because these gas prices are higher? 44% said they had to cut back on driving. 42% are cutting back on household expenses. 34% are adjusting their travel and vacation plans. 15% are considering buying an EV. Although that is potentially about to get way more expensive, by the way. It's a whole different thing.
Yeah. Don't do that.
But Jamal, I mean, we're heading into a midterm election, and this is how Americans are feeling.
They are. I think the president's problem fundamentally, obviously the war is bad, people don't want to be there, it's against his brand. He ran as an economic turnaround artist, and the economy hasn't turned around. Prices are even higher in some ways than they were a year ago. He is run against getting involved in Middle East wars, and now we're in the middle of a Middle East war, and people don't really understand why, and they don't know when it's going to be over. And then the president also ran on, dealing with immigration. What they did not expect was that a bunch of American citizens were going to get wrapped up in that, and a couple of them were going to get killed. This all is against what he ran for as president of the United States. And I think that house is starting to collapse in on him. Now, the question is, what can he do to turn this around, whether it's in the next 6 months or in the next 18 months for whoever's going to succeed him? I'm just not sure there's much he can do, because once people turn you off as president of the United States, ask George Bush, it's very hard to get them to click back in on you.
Agree?
Yeah, look, I think people like us can sit here and analyze the politics of this. I do think one thing about presidents is true. They make national security decisions with other things in mind other than tracking polls or, the media or a political push and pull. They make national security decisions based on information that only they have and based on the threats that they see that are imminent to the American people. That was his argument, that Iran was an imminent threat, that we didn't have time to wait, that this was the correct time to do it. Now, history will judge whether he was right or wrong about that, and history will judge how this ends, and history will judge whether he met his objectives. But in the moment, that's essentially what you hire a president to do, exercise their judgment to make national security decisions based on information that only they have, and that's what he's done here.
But history is really important. I'm glad you brought it up, because I hope that he's looking at history too, because history is there for all of us.
S.E. Cupp knows this, but Donald Trump is not looking at history. We all know that. Donald Trump is an idiot and knows nothing about history.
To look at. And if you look at, say, 1980 and the war between Iran and Iraq, Iraq offered a ceasefire 8 days in. 8 days in, they offered a ceasefire. Iran said no. Iran would say no to ceasefire 6 more times, and that war would drag on for 8 years. Iran doesn't want to move quickly. This is good for Iran. Iran is loving this. And they've been preparing for a war of attrition with us for 20 years. So the president walking in and saying, it's terminated, we're done, we've won, they get a say. The enemy gets a say.
I don't think the Ayatollah would agree that this has been good for him. I mean,
I didn't say for the Ayatollah.
But the top layer of the regime would not agree that it's been.
We've
good
opened up sanctions.
We've
if
destroyed
the point is
their
to drive
economy.
the economy to their
currency.
knees, we're opening up sanctions.
We've destroyed their economy, and their currency is now basically worthless. I think in my opinion, it's a stretch to say it's good for them.
And yet we can't get.
They're not running to get a deal.
Open.
We have it.
They're
closed.
not running to get a
We're
deal.
blocking it. I mean, it's our strategy to keep it closed in order to bring them to the table. That is the current strategy. Now, you may disagree with that or think we should be having a different strategy, but the current strategy is no bombs, but a blockade to bring them to their knees to the point where they have to come to the table.
Look, I don't reflexively root for the president to lose on this, because the president of the United States is the symbol of the American democracy. And so if the president fails, it means that we as a country have failed. The problem is here, the president's not doing what it takes to bring us together in order to accomplish the goal. He's not getting the American people around this goal. He's got some questions about the military strategy. Iran now controls, or is at least a partner in controlling a very strategic asset in the Middle East that they didn't have any say in before. So I think what we need is the president to try to bring Americans together, whether it's Democrats in Congress, it's people in the American public, to try to accomplish this goal. And right now, he's not doing any of those things. Instead, he looks like he's sort of moving all over the place. Iran is holding steady, and the president keeps changing his mind every couple of days.
All right. Well, we're going to continue to
What makes this entire exchange so revealing is that it exposes a fundamental truth about this conflict. The strategy coming out of the Donald Trump administration isn't just flawed, it's internally inconsistent, politically disconnected, and historically ignorant. Start with the core point raised by S.E. Cupp, which even her opponents struggle to rebut. Iran is not behaving like a country under pressure to fold. It's behaving like a country prepared for exactly this scenario. That matters because wars are not judged by intentions, they're judged by outcomes. And right now, the outcomes are stacking up in Iran's favor. The regime remains intact. There is no evidence of meaningful nuclear rollback. And perhaps most critically, Iran has gained leverage in the region, particularly with the disruption of the Strait of Hormuz, something that directly translates into global economic pain. This is where the defense from Scott Jennings completely collapses under scrutiny. His argument hinges on a hypothetical future success, if Iran is eventually stopped, if the blockade works, if the strategy pays off. But that's not a strategy, that's a gamble. And it's a gamble being made without public buy-in, without clear objectives, and without any coherent timeline. History has repeatedly shown that this kind of vague, open-ended military engagement is exactly how the United States gets trapped in prolonged conflicts. And speaking of history, it's impossible to ignore the parallels. From Vietnam to Iraq, the pattern is painfully familiar. An administration sells urgency without clarity, promises quick results, and then pivots to patience when reality sets in. The difference here is that Trump didn't even do the initial work of building public support. As pointed out in the segment, past administrations, right or wrong, at least attempted to justify their actions to the American people. Here, that step was skipped entirely. That failure is now showing up where it always does, public opinion. The polling isn't just bad, it's structurally damning. When a majority of Americans already believe a military action is a mistake this early, that signals a collapse in trust. And once that trust is gone, it rarely comes back. Just ask George W. Bush, whose support eroded as the Iraq War dragged on despite initial backing. But there's an even deeper political contradiction at play here, one that goes beyond foreign policy. Trump built his political identity on two core promises: avoiding endless wars and fixing the economy. This conflict directly undermines both. Not only is the U.S. now entangled in yet another Middle Eastern confrontation, but the economic consequences, especially rising gas prices, are hitting Americans in real, tangible ways. And unlike abstract geopolitical arguments, people understand what it means when filling up their tank becomes more expensive, or when they have to cut back on daily expenses. That's why the data cited in this segment is so devastating. Americans aren't just passively disapproving, they're actively changing their behavior, cutting driving, canceling travel, reducing spending. These are not theoretical concerns. They are lived consequences. And every one of those consequences chips away at the credibility of the administration's decisions. Meanwhile, the justification that presidents act on information the public doesn't have might sound reasonable on paper, but it becomes dangerous when used as a shield against accountability. That logic demands trust, and trust must be earned. Right now, there's no evidence that this administration has earned it, especially given the shifting narratives, unclear objectives, and visible lack of strategic discipline. And then there's the geopolitical reality that Cupp highlights so effectively. Iran is not rushing to negotiate. That alone should shatter the illusion that this pressure campaign is working as intended. If the goal is to force Iran to the table, and Iran is instead digging in, stabilizing internally, and leveraging global economic choke points, then the strategy is not just failing, it's backfiring. What we're witnessing is not strength, it's drift. A president claiming victory one day, adjusting tactics the next, and never quite articulating what success actually looks like. That kind of inconsistency doesn't just confuse allies and embolden adversaries, it erodes confidence at home. And that's the real danger here. Because when a president cannot clearly explain why a war is being fought, cannot demonstrate progress, and